Help my mom. The little girl's voice was barely louder than the rain tapping against the 40-story glass walls of Helix Meridian, but it stopped Malcolm Reed more completely than any alarm ever had. He was kneeling beside the control panel of the revolving entrance, one hand holding a screwdriver, the other steadying a loose wire, when he felt two small fingers tug the sleeve of his navy work shirt. Malcolm looked up. The girl could not have been more than 8. Her dark curls were damp from the storm, and she held a purple backpack tightly against her chest. She was not crying. She was trying very hard not to. "Please," she said. "They won't let her in." Malcolm followed her eyes across the polished marble lobby. A black woman stood at the security desk in a rain-darkened coat, her posture straight despite the water dripping from its hem. Beside her, Colin Voss, the building's head of security, rested one hand near his radio and wore the patient expression of a man pretending not to be impatient. "Ma'am, I've explained this twice," Colin said. "Your credentials are not recognized, and there is no appointment under your name." "Scan it again," the woman replied. "That will not change the result." "Scan it again." The lobby smelled of wet wool, fresh coffee, and floor polish. Beyond the security gates, executives crossed toward the private elevators, checking watches and speaking in low voices about the board meeting scheduled for 9:15. Malcolm rose slowly. He had spent 7 years maintaining the building's access controls. He knew every ordinary denial sound the system could make. He also knew the sound he had just heard was not ordinary. Colin lifted the woman's black metal card and pressed it against the reader. The screen flashed green, only for a heartbeat. Then it turned red. "Access denied." Colin handed the card back. "As I said, it's invalid." Malcolm's gaze stayed on the monitor. Beneath the red warning, a smaller line had appeared and vanished so quickly most people would have missed it. 02. Credential recognized. Administrative restriction. The card was not invalid. Someone had told the system to refuse it. "That's not what the reader said," Malcolm said. Colin turned. "This does not concern maintenance. The door system concerns maintenance. Then fix the door." The girl stepped closer to Malcolm. "My mom doesn't lie." Colin sighed. "Children do not decide who enters a secured building." Malcolm looked at the girl, then at the woman. She had not begged. She had not raised her voice. She simply watched him with the weary caution of someone who had already learned that dignity did not guarantee fair treatment. Malcolm placed his screwdriver into his tool pouch and moved toward the desk. "May I see the card?" he asked. The woman studied him before placing it carefully in his palm. It was heavier than a modern badge, black metal with worn edges and a shallow mark near the corner. "Original access. 02. What's your name?" Malcolm asked. "Naomi Ellis." Colin gave a quiet laugh. "And I'm supposed to be impressed?" Naomi did not look at him. "Did you see the message?" she asked Malcolm. "I saw enough to know the system recognized this." Colin's pleasant mask tightened. "Mr. Reed, return to your assignment. Now." Malcolm glanced toward the entrance. Rain swept sideways across the plaza. The revolving door had begun to lock for the executive security cycle. Maya was still standing between the sensors, one hand reaching back toward her mother. Malcolm pressed the manual hold button and kept the door open. It was a small action. Quiet, legal, human. "She stays with her mother," he said. "No one is separating them over a computer message that does not match your report." Before Colin could answer, the private elevator chimed. Evelyn Shaw, chief of staff to the acting CEO, stepped into the lobby in a cream-colored suit. She looked toward Naomi. For one brief second, recognition crossed her face like a crack through glass. Then it disappeared beneath a warm, professional smile. "Good morning," Evelyn said. "Can someone tell me who this woman is?" Naomi's eyes never left hers. Malcolm felt the little girl's hand tighten around his sleeve. And somewhere above them, 41 floors up, the boardroom clock moved 1 minute closer to a vote someone was desperate to begin without Naomi Ellis in the room. Evelyn Shaw stopped 3 feet from the security desk, her smile polished enough for a shareholder photograph and cold enough to make the rain outside feel warm. I asked who this woman is, she repeated. Colin straightened beside her. She claims to have a board appointment, but there is nothing on the schedule. Naomi held Evelyn's gaze. You know exactly who I am. I am afraid I do not. Then check the 8:45 calendar entry. There is no 8:45 calendar entry. 3 answers came quickly, cleanly, almost rehearsed. Malcolm watched Evelyn place a slim tablet on the marble counter. Her fingers moved across the screen, and a blank calendar filled the display. No Naomi Egis. No visiter duseresaschen. No meeting request. Behind them, the lobby lights reflected across the wet floor like pale lines drawn through glass. The private elevators chimed again, and 2 board members crossed the security gate without slowing down. One of them, an older man with silver hair, glanced toward Naomi. Recognition seemed to stir in his expression, but the young assistant beside him leaned close and whispered something. The elevator doors closed before he could look back. You see, Evelyn said softly, there is no record of an appointment. Naomi did not move. There was a record 6 weeks ago. Then perhaps it was cancelled. By whom? I would not know. Malcolm's eyes shifted to the corner of Evelyn's tablet. A small synchronization symbol was still turning. Beneath it, the system showed the last update time. 8:39 in the morning. For minutes before Maya had pulled his sleeve. Evelyn noticed where he was looking and tilted the screen away. Mr. Reed, this is an executive scheduling matter. The calendar was refreshed 4 minutes before they arrived, Malcolm said. Colin folded his arms. That proves nothing. I did not say it proved anything. Then stop interfering. Maya stood close to her mother now, both hands wrapped around one strap of her purple backpack. She looked up at Evelyn with the solemn confusion of a child watching adults use polite words to do something unkind. My mom said people were waiting for her upstairs, Maya said. Evelyn lowered her voice into a careful sweetness. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes about schedules. Naomi rested one hand on her daughter's shoulder. My daughter did not make the mistake. Evelyn's smile held, but only barely. This building cannot admit anyone who arrives without verified authorization. I am sure you understand. We are simply protecting the process. Malcolm looked through the glass doors. Rainwater rushed along the curb, and a delivery truck sprayed a sheet of water across the sidewalk. The temperature outside was barely above 50 degrees. He looked back at Maya's damp curls and Naomi's soaked coat. There is a technical waiting area past the East Corridor, he said. It is authorized for delayed visitors while credentials are reviewed. Colin shook his head. Not for them. The policy says delayed visitors. The policy also gives security discretion. Discretion is not the same as sending a child back into a storm. Evelyn turned toward Malcolm, still composed. You appear to be taking this personally. I am taking the system message seriously. Naomi looked at him. Do not risk your job for us. Malcolm met her eyes. I am not taking you upstairs. I am giving your daughter a chair and giving the system 10 minutes to explain why it recognized a card that security says does not exist. Colin stepped closer. You are choosing the wrong people to defend. Malcolm pressed his employee badge to the East Corridor reader. The light turned green. Maybe, he said, but I am not choosing to leave a child standing in the rain while adults argue over a screen. He opened the door and motioned for Naomi and Maya to enter. Maya looked at her mother first. Naomi gave one small nod. They crossed into the corridor. Evelyn moved to the tablet and closed a window so quickly that Malcolm almost missed the label at the top. Calendar audit. Almost. As the door began to shut, Maya looked back through the narrowing space. Can someone really erase a real appointment? She asked. Malcolm paused with one hand on the handle. The ventilation system hummed above them, steady and low, while the private elevator carried another group toward the 41st floor. They can erase what people see, he said. But most systems remember what people change. Behind the glass, Evelyn's fingers stopped moving. Then her eyes lifted to Malcolm, and for the first time that morning, the kindness disappeared from her face. The technical waiting room was no larger than a break area, with white walls, humming ventilation, 2 gray chairs, and a vending machine that had been out of order for nearly a month. It was never designed to hold people carrying the weight of a board meeting. Malcolm filled a paper cup with cold water from the dispenser and handed it to Maya before quietly finding a clean towel from the maintenance cabinet for Naomi. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Outside the narrow window, rain streaked down the glass in slow, uneven lines while the distant elevators continued carrying executives toward the 41st floor. Maya accepted the cup with both hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Malcolm noticed she waited until her mother nodded before taking a drink. Naomi gently removed the damp jacket from Maya's shoulders and folded it across the back of a chair. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. It looked like hundreds of ordinary mornings between a mother and a daughter. That ordinary kindness made everything happening outside feel even more out of place. Malcolm plugged a charging cable into the wall and held it toward Naomi. "Your phone looked almost dead." She hesitated only a moment before accepting it. "Thank you." The screen came alive with 1% remaining before the battery symbol finally began climbing. Malcolm clipped a small maintenance tablet onto the desk and logged into the building support system. He did not search for Naomi Ellis. He searched for the access reader itself. Machines remembered events differently than people did. They did not care about titles, reputations, or expensive suits. They simply recorded what happened. He opened the incident menu and entered a standard equipment report. Reader momentarily displayed conflicting authorization status during credential verification. He attached the device identification number, the exact timestamp, and the error sequence he had witnessed. Before submitting the report, he looked toward Naomi. "I am not proving who you are," he said. "I am documenting what the equipment did." Naomi gave a faint nod. "That is exactly what you should do." Malcolm pressed submit. The loading symbol spun for less than 2 seconds. Then the status changed unexpectedly. "Closed by executive instruction." His eyebrows lifted. Equipment tickets did not close themselves. Not this quickly. He opened the activity history. 8:51 and 7 seconds. Authorized by E. Shaw. Malcolm looked back toward the lobby through the narrow glass panel in the door. Evelyn had claimed only moments earlier that she did not know who Naomi was. Yet somehow she had already found and closed a maintenance report connected to Naomi's credential before anyone from engineering had even reviewed it. Malcolm enlarged the activity log without saying a word. Naomi watched his expression carefully. "Something changed?" she asked. "Someone above maintenance is watching this incident in real time." "Who?" Malcolm rotated the tablet so she could see the final line herself. She read the name once, then slowly looked away. There was disappointment in her face, but not surprise. Maya had finished her water and was sitting cross-legged beside her backpack, quietly drawing on the blank back page of an old building safety brochure with a blue crayon she found inside her pencil case. She was sketching a revolving door with 3 stick figures holding hands. Malcolm smiled for only a second before his attention returned to the report. Naomi noticed the family photograph tucked behind the clear cover of his employee badge. A young black girl with bright eyes stood beside him wearing a homemade science fair ribbon. "Your daughter?" she asked. Malcolm nodded. "Tiana, 5th grade. She must be proud of her father." Malcolm gave a small laugh. "Some days. Other days she just wants me to remember to bring home orange juice." Naomi smiled for the first time that morning. It was brief, almost hidden, but genuine. "Why did you help us?" she asked quietly. Malcolm leaned back against the counter. "Because I know what it feels like when a child watches adults. Pretend not to see someone standing right in front of them." Neither of them spoke after that. The ventilation continued its steady rhythm overhead. Somewhere beyond the walls, another elevator bell echoed through the building. Malcolm reopened the access report and examined the credential details more carefully. The serial number was etched directly into the metal instead of printed on plastic like every modern employee badge. Original access. 02. The engraving showed years of wear, but it had not been altered. Whoever made it had expected it to last. Malcolm searched the hardware archive connected to the access system. A reference appeared almost immediately. Prototype Credential Series. First generation executive issue. He had never seen one outside the archive before. Before he could open the historical record, another notification appeared across the screen. Executive review initiated. User access limited. Someone upstairs had noticed exactly what he was looking at. Malcolm slowly closed the tablet, but one thought remained impossible to ignore. Naomi had never asked him to believe her story. She had only asked him to believe what the system itself was quietly trying to say. Malcolm left the tablet resting on the desk, but his mind refused to rest with it. Years of maintaining secure systems had taught him one lesson above every other. Computers made mistakes. People made choices. The difficult part was knowing which one he was looking at. He turned toward Naomi. "I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." She nodded without hesitation. "Go ahead. If you really had a meeting with the board this morning, why did you come here alone? No attorney, no executive assistant, no security detail, just you and your daughter." Naomi looked at Maya, who was quietly coloring the revolving door she had drawn only moments earlier. "Because I wanted to know whether anyone in this building would recognize the truth without recognizing my name." Malcolm frowned slightly. "That is not really an answer." "No," she admitted. "It is only part of one." She folded her hands together. "The rest will not matter unless you first decide whether the facts deserve your attention." Malcolm appreciated the restraint, but it also made him cautious. A convincing story was not evidence. A calm voice was not proof. He picked up his phone and searched publicly for Naomi Ellis. Several articles appeared immediately. One photograph showed a black woman standing beside two men during the opening of Helix Meridian almost 12 years earlier. The woman in the picture resembled Naomi, but time and distance made certainty impossible. Another headline described her as a co-founder who had stepped away from public life because of health concerns. A more recent article referred to the acting chief executive officer as the company's steady hand during her absence. None of it answered the question that mattered. Why would a co-founder be locked out of her own building? Malcolm zoomed in on the old photograph. Around Naomi's wrist was a silver bracelet engraved with a small geometric symbol. His eyes shifted toward the black metal credential lying on the table beside her phone. The same symbol had been etched into one corner of the card. It was interesting. It was not conclusive. His phone vibrated before he could think any further. The screen lit up with Tiana's smiling face. "Dad, are you still coming?" she asked. Bright posters covered the classroom wall behind her. Several children hurried through the background carrying cardboard models for the afternoon science showcase. Malcolm checked the time. "I am trying, sweetheart. You promised you would see my presentation." "I know." She studied his expression. "Something happened, did it not?" Malcolm glanced toward Naomi and Maya. "Someone needs a little help." Tiana smiled gently. "You always tell me that helping people takes longer than planning to help them." Malcolm laughed softly despite the weight pressing on his shoulders. "I did say that. Just do not forget me." "I never could. I will save you a seat." The call ended, leaving the room even quieter than before. Naomi spoke carefully. "Your daughter sounds remarkable. She keeps me honest. Then do not let me become the reason you disappoint her." Malcolm slipped the phone into his pocket. "You are not the reason. Uncertainty is." Naomi accepted that answer without offense. "Good," she said. "You should be uncertain." She pointed toward the credential resting on the table. "Do not believe me because I sound confident. Do not believe me because a child asked for help. Believe only what survives verification." Malcolm looked at the card again. Every instinct told him something inside the building had been manipulated, but another instinct reminded him that clever people could manufacture convincing situations. He opened the archived security reports connected to the access control network. Most historical records were restricted, yet maintenance staff could still read equipment histories connected to hardware failures. A report from several weeks earlier appeared near the top of the list. Access Credential A02. Administrative suspension authorized by Acting Chief Executive Officer Grant Keller. Malcolm stared at the date. The suspension order had been entered nearly 3 weeks before the public announcement that Naomi Ellis had stepped away from company affairs. His heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. That was always how his mind reacted when a puzzle became real. Across the room, Maya looked up from her drawing. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Malcolm answered honestly, "I do not know yet." He enlarged the report and continued reading. A second notification appeared beneath it. Security incident filed by Colin Voss. Credential declared invalid. Malcolm compared the two records twice. They did not say the same thing. One claimed the credential had been administratively suspended. The other claimed it had never been valid at all. Someone was not simply denying access. Someone was changing the story. Before Malcolm could open the attached audit trail, another alert appeared across his screen. User permissions updated. Historical records now restricted. He had lost access in the middle of the search. Malcolm slowly lowered the tablet. Only a handful of executives could authorize permission changes that quickly, which meant whoever was watching the system already knew exactly where he was looking. Malcolm stared at the permission warning for another moment before locking his tablet. Whatever was happening inside Helix Meridian was moving faster than an ordinary technical problem. Someone with executive authority had noticed his search almost immediately, and that meant every additional click would leave another footprint. He slipped the tablet back into its case and looked toward Naomi. She had not interrupted him once while he worked. She simply waited, watching Maya finish coloring the little drawing of the revolving door. "You found something," Naomi said quietly. Malcolm answered with the same honesty he had used from the beginning. "I found enough to know someone does not want me looking any further." Naomi lowered her eyes for a second. "Then stop." Malcolm looked surprised. "Excuse me? You have a daughter waiting for you after school. You have a job that provides for her. I did not come here expecting someone else to pay the price for my problems." Malcolm folded his arms. "You still have not told me why your access was suspended before the company announced you were gone." Naomi took a slow breath. "Because if I answer that before you verify the records, then every fact you discover will sound like it came from me instead of the system." Malcolm could not argue with that logic. The strongest evidence was always the evidence that existed before anyone started telling a story. He reopened one maintenance archive that had not yet been restricted. Older hardware tickets were copied nightly onto a separate storage server for warranty purposes. Executive administrators rarely paid attention to that database because it was considered routine equipment history. Malcolm searched only the credential number. 02. One record appeared. Then another. The earliest ticket was dated nearly 11 years earlier when the first-generation access readers had been installed. The credential had been classified as Founder Access Series. Malcolm leaned closer. A later maintenance note caught his attention. Administrative override requested. Credential remains authentic. Access blocked by executive policy. He read the sentence twice. Authentic. Not counterfeit. Not expired. Authentic. The difference mattered. He quietly exported the maintenance checksum and saved it inside the compliance archive where every access generated a permanent timestamp. He was not copying confidential information onto a personal device. He was preserving an official record exactly as company policy required. A soft electronic tone echoed through the room. A new internal message appeared on his maintenance tablet before disappearing almost as quickly as it had arrived. Equipment review unnecessary. Close all related tickets immediately. No signature. No department. Malcolm frowned. Anonymous executive messages were unusual. Company procedures required every instruction to identify its source. "Someone is getting nervous," he murmured. Naomi looked at him but did not ask what he meant. Maya lifted her drawing. "Do you think this door looks real?" she asked. Malcolm smiled and accepted the paper. The little revolving door was not perfectly round, but every figure held someone else's hand. "It looks strong," he answered. "Doors are stronger when people do not let go." Maya smiled proudly and returned to coloring. Malcolm looked back at the maintenance history. The final update listed the workstation used to issue the executive override. Executive Office Terminal 7. He opened another directory that tracked equipment assigned to administrative offices. Terminal 7 belonged to the office of the acting chief executive officer, but one additional detail caught his attention. The override itself had not been entered from the chief executive officer's desk. It had been submitted remotely through the workstation assigned to Evelyn Shaw. Malcolm slowly exhaled. The suspension order had originated from the office of the woman who had stood in the lobby insisting she had never met Naomi Ellis. He still refused to jump to conclusions. A workstation assignment did not prove who pressed the keys. Someone else could have used it. Someone else could have logged in. But the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. Just then the room phone mounted beside the vending machine rang once. Malcolm answered. Maintenance. Colin's voice came through the receiver, calm and professional. Mr. Reed, the acting chief executive officer, has requested that all unresolved access questions be handled upstairs. Please return to your normal duties immediately. Malcolm glanced at Naomi, then at the maintenance log still glowing on his screen. I will return when I finish documenting my equipment inspection. Colin paused for a fraction of a second. There is no equipment problem. Malcolm looked down at the maintenance history that clearly stated otherwise. That is not what your own records say. Silence lingered on the line for 2 long seconds before Colin replied, Be careful not to misunderstand information that is above your responsibility. The call ended. Malcolm set the receiver down gently. He was no longer looking at isolated mistakes. He was looking at a trail. One record confirmed the credential was authentic. Another showed it had been deliberately suspended. A third connected the override to Evelyn's office. And now someone was asking him to stop reading before he reached the next page. As he opened the final archived maintenance attachment, one new label appeared at the top of the screen, and this time it changed everything. Calendar synchronization audit attached. Malcolm touched the new attachment with the tip of his finger, but instead of opening it immediately, he looked across the room at Naomi. Before I read another file, I need to test one thing. She nodded. Fair. He reached into the maintenance cabinet and removed a portable credential reader that technicians used whenever a wall unit malfunctioned. It was not connected to the building network. It simply read the physical information stored inside a badge without granting access to any door. Malcolm placed it on the table between them. This cannot tell me who owns the card, he explained. It can only tell me whether the card itself is genuine. Naomi slid the black metal credential across the table without hesitation. That is all I want you to test. Maya watched quietly from her chair, still adding blue lines around the little doorway she had drawn. She was humming softly to herself, unaware that every minute carried the board meeting closer. Malcolm powered on the handheld reader. The screen glowed pale blue before displaying a prompt, asking for credential input. He placed the metal card against the sensor. The machine paused for several seconds. Then a string of characters slowly appeared across the display. Legacy Executive Authentication Sequence. Hardware Generation 1. Malcolm frowned. He had expected an identification number. Instead, he was looking at an authentication format that had not been used in years. Naomi spoke before he looked up. The first 6 characters should begin with Alpha 9 Echo. Malcolm turned the screen toward himself. Alpha 9 Echo. Exactly as she had said. How did you know that? He asked. Naomi folded her hands calmly. Because I helped design the original authentication structure. Malcolm did not answer right away. Anyone could make a lucky guess once. So he restarted the reader and scanned the card a second time. The same sequence appeared. He checked the engineering reference manual stored inside the maintenance software. The format matched the archived documentation exactly. It still did not prove Naomi owned the credential. It proved only that the credential itself belonged to the original executive series. That distinction mattered to Malcolm, and Naomi seemed relieved that he respected it. You still should not trust me, she said. Someone could have stolen this card years ago. Malcolm nodded. Exactly. Then find another source that agrees with the card instead of agreeing with me. He appreciated that answer more than any explanation she could have offered. Real evidence became stronger when it stood alone. He reached for the maintenance phone and called the Secure Records department responsible for retired access hardware. After identifying himself, he requested confirmation of the credential series rather than the owner's identity. The records specialist placed him on hold. Soft instrumental music filled the room for almost a minute before the specialist returned. Credential series confirmed, the woman said. Series A was issued only to the original founding executive group. Ownership records require higher authorization, but the hardware itself is authentic. Thank you, Malcolm replied, ending the call. That gave him a second. Independent confirmation. One from the handheld reader, another from the archive department. Neither relied on Naomi's story. Before he could continue, footsteps echoed outside the waiting room. The door opened without a knock. Colin Voss stood in the doorway holding a sealed evidence envelope. Company policy, he said evenly. I am here to collect that credential for security review. Malcolm remained seated. Under what authorization? Colin held up a printed order. Executive Directive. Malcolm accepted the paper and immediately noticed the timestamp in the upper corner. 8:37 in the morning. He looked at the clock on the wall. Naomi had first scanned the credential at approximately 8:41. Malcolm read the order again to make certain he had not mistaken the numbers. He had not. The collection order had been prepared 4 minutes before anyone in the lobby supposedly knew Naomi had arrived. He slowly raised his eyes to Colin. This order was written before the card was ever presented at the front desk. Colin's expression did not change. It was prepared as a precaution. A precaution against someone carrying a credential you say does not exist? Silence settled across the room. Maya stopped coloring and looked from one adult to another without speaking. Naomi did not interrupt. She simply watched Malcolm reach into a storage drawer and remove a clear evidence pouch with an official chain of custody label. Instead of handing the credential to Colin directly, Malcolm sealed it inside the pouch, signed the custody line, and locked it inside the maintenance evidence cabinet. If this credential is going anywhere, he said quietly, it follows documented procedure. Colin's jaw tightened for the first time that morning. You are making this more complicated than it needs to be. Malcolm closed the cabinet door. No. Someone else already did that before they ever saw the card. Colin turned without another word and walked away. As the door closed, Malcolm looked back at the handheld reader. A final system notice had appeared while he was speaking. Linked archive available. Calendar synchronization records detected. Whatever was hidden inside that audit was no longer connected only to a badge. It was connected to the meeting itself. Malcolm waited until Colin's footsteps disappeared before touching the calendar synchronization audit. Unlike the access records, this file had not been created by the security department. It belonged to the software responsible for copying executive calendars between private servers and employee scheduling systems. Most technicians ignored it because the reports were little more than lines of code and timestamps. Malcolm had spent years repairing synchronization failures. He knew exactly where to look. The audit opened with hundreds of routine updates, each marked with a time, a user, and a verification code. Then one line stood apart from the rest. 8:39 and 12 seconds. Calendar entry modified. Organizer unchanged. Visibility changed. Malcolm narrowed his eyes. The event itself had not been deleted. Only its visibility had changed. He opened the metadata. Original title, Executive Governance Review. Updated title, Vendor Complaint Follow-Up. Location unchanged. 41st floor boardroom. Scheduled attendees unchanged. The meeting had never disappeared. Someone had simply renamed it so that ordinary staff would never recognize its importance. Malcolm checked the participant list, but most of the names were hidden behind executive privacy settings. Only one remained partially visible because of a synchronization delay. Annelise. He looked up slowly. Naomi had been telling the truth about the meeting from the very beginning. What did you find? She asked. Malcolm rotated the tablet so she could see only the public fields. The appointment existed. Naomi did not smile. Instead, she closed her eyes for a brief moment, as though carrying the quiet relief of finally hearing another person say what she already knew. Did they erase it? Maya asked. Malcolm shook his head. No. They hid it. Maya frowned. Why? No one answered immediately. Some questions deserved evidence before opinions. Malcolm continued reading. A second modification appeared less than 30 seconds later. Visitor authorization removed. Credential association deleted. Manual. Synchronization completed. User account. Evelyn Shaw. This time there was no uncertainty. The audit preserved both the workstation and the authenticated user account because synchronization changes required individual verification. Malcolm stared at the screen in silence. Naomi watched him carefully. That is enough, she said. No, Malcolm replied quietly. It is enough to show someone changed the records. It is not enough to explain why. Before Naomi could answer, another gentle knock sounded at the door. It opened slowly, revealing a woman wearing a simple gray identification badge with the word compliance beneath her name. Priya Shah. She looked first at Malcolm, then at Naomi, then at the evidence cabinet. I have been looking for the maintenance technician who filed the unusual access report, she said. Malcolm stood. That was me. Priya stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Your report triggered an automatic legal preservation alert because it involved executive credential changes during an active board session. Malcolm remained cautious. Is that a problem? Actually, Priya answered. It prevents certain records from being permanently deleted until they are reviewed. Naomi looked at Priya with quiet recognition. You work in compliance now. Priya nodded respectfully. Yes, Dr. Ellis. Malcolm noticed the exchange immediately. Unlike Evelyn, Priya had recognized Naomi without hesitation and without performance. Priya turned back toward Malcolm. Did anyone instruct you to close your ticket? Yes. Did the instruction identify who issued it? No. Priya's expression became more serious. That violates company retention policy. She removed a small encrypted drive from her pocket. If you have preserved any system checksums or audit references, copy only the integrity hashes to this device, not the confidential files themselves. The hashes prove the records existed in a specific condition without exposing protected content. Malcolm appreciated the precision. She was following procedure exactly. He exported only the verification hashes from the maintenance report, the credential archive, and the calendar synchronization audit. Each generated a unique digital fingerprint. Priya verified the timestamps and locked the drive. Now, she said calmly, if anyone changes those records later, we will know. Naomi looked at Malcolm with new respect. You protected the evidence without breaking the rules. Malcolm answered simply. Rules are supposed to protect the truth, not hide it. Priya slipped the encrypted drive into her folder. The board meeting officially begins in less than 15 minutes. After the vote starts, changing company leadership becomes much more complicated. Malcolm glanced toward the hallway where the elevators continued carrying executives upstairs. Rain still tapped softly against the distant windows, but the storm was beginning to fade. Sunlight struggled through the clouds, casting pale reflections across the polished floor outside the waiting room. Then Malcolm's maintenance tablet vibrated once more. A new system notification appeared. Independent attendee confirmed. Julian Cross has entered the building. Malcolm looked at the name twice. Naomi slowly opened her eyes. For the first time that morning, hope replaced exhaustion on her face. If Julian is here, she whispered. Then someone finally came who remembers how this company really began. Malcolm read the notification again to make certain he had not imagined it. Independent attendee confirmed. Julian Cross has entered the building. The name carried weight even for someone who had never worked above the maintenance level. Julian had rarely appeared in public during the past several years, yet his signature still remained on some of the oldest engineering standards inside the company. Malcolm looked toward Naomi. You expected him. Naomi answered quietly. I hoped for him. There is a difference. Priya checked the time on her badge. If Mr. Cross came directly to the boardroom, the meeting may already be starting. Maya carefully folded her drawing and slipped it into her purple backpack. Does he know my mom? She asked. Naomi smiled gently. He knew me before you were born. The room fell silent for a moment. Outside the narrow window, the rain had almost stopped. Thin bands of sunlight stretched across the polished stone plaza, making the wet pavement shine like glass. It felt as though the morning itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Malcolm unlocked his tablet once more and opened the calendar synchronization audit. A small icon blinked beside the renamed meeting. Archived revisions available. Most employees never noticed that feature because ordinary calendar changes were unimportant after they were completed. Malcolm selected the revision history. Every modification appeared in chronological order. Original meeting title: Executive Governance Review. First revision: Visibility restricted. Second revision: Renamed vendor complaint follow-up. Third revision: Visitor authorization removed. Fourth revision: Internal note added. The note had not been erased. It had simply been hidden from standard users. Malcolm opened it carefully. Approved attendee delayed. Do not permit lobby escalation before board vote. He read the sentence twice. Priya leaned closer without touching the screen. Preserve that revision hash, she said softly. Malcolm exported the integrity value immediately. Naomi remained completely still. They were not trying to determine whether I belonged here, she said. They were trying to delay me until the vote finished. Malcolm nodded slowly. That is what the timeline suggests. He still refused to say it proved intent. The records were becoming stronger, but they needed independent confirmation. Just then, another message appeared across the maintenance network. Elevator service request. 41st floor executive corridor. Assigned technician. Malcolm Reed. He frowned. That is strange. Priya looked at the screen. Is there actually an elevator problem? Malcolm checked the diagnostics. Every elevator reported normal operation. No. Someone specifically requested me. Naomi met his eyes. Do not go alone. Before Malcolm could answer, the waiting room phone rang again. This time the caller identified himself immediately. Maintenance? This is Julian Cross. I was told the technician named Malcolm Reed documented an unusual credential issue this morning. Malcolm exchanged a quick glance with Priya before responding. Yes, sir. Julian's voice was calm, measured, and older than Malcolm expected. Do you have Dr. Naomi Ellis with you? Malcolm looked toward Naomi. She gave the slightest nod. Yes. A long breath came through the receiver before Julian spoke again. Please tell her I am sorry it took me this long to get here. Naomi closed her eyes for only a second. When she opened them again, they were steady. He remembers, she whispered. Julian continued. Do not bring her to the boardroom yet. Someone has already informed the directors that she declined to attend today's meeting. I need 5 minutes to correct that statement before she walks through those doors. Malcolm answered carefully. Understood. One more thing, Julian added. Do not surrender the A02 credential to anyone except compliance under documented chain of custody. If that credential disappears, the original access history becomes much harder to explain. Malcolm glanced toward the locked evidence cabinet. It is secured. Good, Julian replied. Keep it that way. The call ended. Priya immediately documented the conversation in the compliance log, recording only the time, the participants, and the preservation instruction. No opinions. No assumptions. Just facts. Malcolm appreciated that discipline. It matched everything he believed about evidence. Then his tablet vibrated once again. Another executive message had arrived. Mandatory employee meeting. Malcolm Reed. Report immediately to the office of the acting chief executive officer. Failure to appear may result in disciplinary action. The room became very quiet. Maya looked up at Malcolm with worried eyes. Are you in trouble? Malcolm smiled gently, the same way he smiled whenever Tiana asked difficult questions. Sometimes doing the right thing makes people ask hard questions. Priya closed her folder. If you go upstairs now, do not go as a witness trying to win an argument. Go as a technician who documented what the systems recorded. Malcolm nodded. That was exactly who he intended to be. He picked up his maintenance tablet, checked that every preservation hash had been secured, and looked once more at the locked cabinet holding the black metal credential. Then he turned toward the door, knowing that whatever waited on the 41st floor would no longer be about a broken access card. It would be about whether quiet truth could survive inside a room that had already decided what story it wanted to believe. The elevator climbed with almost no sound, floor numbers rising one after another while Malcolm stood alone with his maintenance tablet resting against his side. Every reflection in the brushed steel walls reminded him that he was not going upstairs as an executive, an attorney, or a shareholder. He was going as the technician who had documented what the building itself had recorded. That distinction mattered. Opinions could be dismissed. Proper records could not. When the doors opened onto the 41st floor, the atmosphere felt completely different from the lobby below. Thick carpet softened every footstep. Quiet conversations drifted through wide hallways lined with photographs showing the company's earliest days. Malcolm recognized one image immediately. 3 founders stood beside the first prototype of their medical technology platform. Julian Cross was on the left. A younger Naomi Ellis stood in the center. Grant Keller was nowhere in the picture. Malcolm slowed only long enough to confirm what he had already suspected before continuing toward the executive reception desk. Evelyn Shaw was waiting. Her smile returned the moment she saw him, polished and perfectly controlled. "Mr. Reed," she said warmly. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Malcolm nodded politely. "I received the meeting request. The acting chief executive officer simply wants to understand why a routine access issue became such a significant distraction. I documented what the system reported." "Of course you did." Evelyn folded her hands. Sometimes technical employees see isolated details without understanding the broader business context. Malcolm answered calmly. "That is possible." She seemed almost relieved by his response. "Then perhaps we can resolve this very quickly." She led him into a small conference room overlooking the city. Grant Keller stood beside the windows with a folder in one hand and a cup of untouched coffee in the other. He greeted Malcolm with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to agreement. "Mr. Reed," Grant said, "thank you for your professionalism." Malcolm returned the greeting. "Sir." Grant gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." Malcolm remained standing. "I am comfortable here." Grant smiled politely. "Very well. I reviewed your maintenance report. It appears there was confusion involving an outdated credential carried by an individual who no longer has operational responsibilities within this company." Malcolm listened without interrupting. "Unfortunately," Grant continued, "our systems occasionally produce misleading technical messages when legacy credentials are scanned. I assume that explains your concern." Malcolm considered the statement carefully before answering. "The maintenance records described the credential as authentic." Grant's smile faded only slightly. "Authentic hardware does not necessarily mean active authorization." "Agreed." Malcolm kept his voice steady. "But the calendar synchronization audit also shows a scheduled meeting whose visibility was changed before the credential was scanned." Evelyn spoke before Grant could respond. "Executive calendars change constantly." Malcolm nodded once. "That is true. Then surely you understand there is nothing unusual about schedule revisions." "Schedule revisions are ordinary," Malcolm replied. "Anonymous instructions are not." Grant placed his coffee on the table. "Mr. Reed, what exactly are you suggesting?" Malcolm shook his head. "I am not suggesting anything. I am explaining what I documented." He opened his tablet and displayed only the integrity hashes preserved through compliance. These verification values correspond to the maintenance report, the credential archive, and the calendar audit. Compliance preserved them before any additional system changes occurred. Evelyn's eyes moved immediately to the timestamps. Grant remained expressionless, but Malcolm noticed the slightest tightening around his jaw. Silence settled across the room. Finally, Grant smiled again, although the warmth no longer reached his eyes. "You have been thorough. That is my job." "Your job," Grant replied gently, "is maintaining equipment, not participating in corporate governance." Malcolm accepted the correction without argument. "Which is why I have expressed no opinion about corporate governance." He looked directly at Grant. "Only about equipment records and documented system activity." Before Grant could answer, a voice echoed from the hallway outside. "Then perhaps the board should hear what the equipment recorded." The conference room door opened. Julian Cross stepped inside without hurry, carrying nothing except a thin leather notebook worn smooth with age. Several board members followed behind him, their expressions uncertain after hearing the final sentence. Julian looked first at Malcolm, then at Grant, and finally toward the conference table. "I believe," he said quietly, "this discussion has already become part of today's board business."